I just started a position with Great Basin National Park.
Oh,
Um,
fantastic.
and it's my first permanent position. So, I am very humbled. And I honestly, one of the reasons I got this position was because of GYF, because of
Mhm.
my PLC. So,
That's
you know,
fantastic.
yeah. I'm also proud to say that I can officially say that I am the first Hispanic Latino person in this position at this park. I just started a new position with MPS at a small park called Great Basin National Park in Baker, Nevada, and it's a rural area of Nevada. So it's a town of less than 100 people. So it's
Oh
very
wow.
small.
Mhm.
And I'm just getting back to work. I'm just getting back to work this week because I was laid off pretty much since everything started shutting down because of COVID up until I got hired here. So kind of getting back in the rhythm is kind of funky, and then being in such a remote location is really strange, man. It's weird, but yeah. So
Yeah, is that so? I'm guessing that's your first time at a town. I guess you could call it that small.
yes, it is. And you know, when I left Everglades National Park with my internship there, I got my first seasonal federal position with the
Mhm.
Bureau of Land Management in Colorado. And that was a pretty small town that I moved to as well. It was very small, but we still had a Walmart that was pretty close by.
Mhm.
You had different things. The closest Walmart is like 2.5 hours away.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
So it is very,
Wow.
very remote. But it's kind of exciting because it'll be a new experience, and uh, eventually, if I make my way back home, I'm originally from Miami, so I'm very used to having a lot of diversity around me, and things like that. So, I hope to bring back these experiences one day and share it with the rest of my community because I think it's a lot of things that I realized something, uh, growing up in the city, you don't get, you're kind of out of touch with, the way that certain people live their lives in places like this, which
Yeah.
is, kind of interesting to me. But anyway, yeah,
Yeah, that's like a really huge lifestyle change. But
it
it's
is.
admirable that you're even doing that.
Yeah, it was pretty scary. But at least I took, you know, like kind of like baby steps in a way,
Mhm.
so it wasn't just overnight. So I think that would have been terrifying to do. I think I'd be terrified to do that. So, hey,
Yeah.
but I want to say I was checking out your other videos on your podcast, man, and it's really great. It's really well
Yeah.
done. I just want to say it was really really cool watching some of the other, Green Speaker series. I was watching the one with Shatiba.
Mhm.
That was a really cool. Her story was awesome, man.
Thank you so much, Juan. That's
Yeah,
huge.
thank you for that. Yeah, we
No,
really
for
wanted to
sure. And
bring this series back. I'm sorry, go ahead.
yeah, yeah. I'm not a very super like active social media person, but I kind of want to like go on Facebook and I just want to like share your guys' series because that I feel like people should hear about it more. It's kind of interesting out west. I don't know if you guys have heard of an organization called the Great Basin Institute. They kind of do similar internship positions and things
Mhm.
like that, similar to the way that GYF does. So they set up, people to, be part of the federal workforce and kind of provide them, a way in. And so, anyway, it was just kind of get me thinking. I'm like, man, because there's a lot of those folks that work here at the park, and they kind of work all throughout the West. And so, and I feel very proud to have, come from working in GYF. Is my internet a little? Am I choppy, or is my connection good?
Yeah,
you are
it's a little choppy.
Oh no, yeah. So that's one thing that's kind of tricky about being out here is the internet connection. Is the other day, it must have been my third day that I got here. The entire town lost all cell service and internet service.
Oh wow! Jeez, what an introduction!
Yeah, it's crazy, man. It's crazy.
So I'm guessing it's a town with only like one internet provider.
Yeah, and it's not even it's not like super high speed internet. It uses the cell tower, so it uses like 4G, that you get on your phone.
Got you. Oh Lord, the struggle is real.
I know. So it's gonna take some getting used to. I will say that, but I mean, thankfully this first week I'm kind of working from home, so it's giving me a little bit of time to, settle in and explore my surroundings. So,
how has that initial transition been?
It was pretty good because I was staying at a little motel in town for the first week while I was figuring out what my housing situation was going to be. There's a town that's a bigger town about an hour away, and they have everything pretty much you need. They got a grocery store, they have a McDonald's, they have a movie theater, and it's not huge, but it's still a town with all your amenities. And it's an hour away, and I was originally planning on potentially moving there because it has more things, but then an opportunity opened up for me to move into park housing. So I just decided, hey, you know what? Might as well just be right here in the middle of it all. So I just said, why not?
Got you. And that was very fortunate with the park housing. So
yeah,
I want to ask, like, how has the staff there been? Like, have they sort of trimmed down and gone to more remote work, or are you still going to be like in the field or at the center?
Yeah. So I mean, it seems like pretty much everybody is still working at home for the most part. Some people are going into the office occasionally. I will still be conducting a lot of field work, but it will be I don't think it will be as much as it would be in past years. So
gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. And where are you guys based out of right now? Where is everybody coming from right now?
So yeah, we've been working from home since March. But I think most of us are still in the Atlanta area. I know I'm like just outside of downtown, so my place is pretty quiet around here.
Okay.
But yeah. So thank you to everybody for watching, for joining us on another episode of the Green Speakers podcast. And today we have an alumni of Greening Youth Foundation, Juan Carlos, who is here to talk about his experience working with us and what it's like to basically be in the field. And so, Juan, really quick, I did want to ask, how do you pronounce your last name? Is it?
So if you're going to try and pronounce it in English, it would be Jarquin. But pronouncing it in Spanish, it would be the J becomes an H. So you pronounce it Jarquin. Jarquin.
Oh, Jarquin. Okay. I thought I'd ask because I didn't want to slander it.
No, it's okay.
But yeah, so
yeah, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say thank you again for being on the podcast. We're super excited to have you on. And Ebony actually sent us a message, and she was like, "Yeah, Juan wants to do this. Let's make it happen." And I was like, "All right, let's do it." It's always really fun to talk to alumni and really just get sort of that like unfiltered like opinion of the experience that you went through. Because there's not a lot of companies that do internships like we do with the federal government. And so I think it's really good for us to really just collect these opinions from people of what this process was like, especially if it wasn't a field that they saw themselves going into. So my first question for you was actually going to be, how did you come to want to work in the environmental field?
Oh man, it's a long story, but essentially my first experience with wanting to work in this realm, this kind of, from environmental conservation to historic preservation, was when I was in Miami-Dade College, which is the community college down in Miami. And I was taking a class where I had to do some community engagement, some community service, and I did a small stint working with a nature conservancy. It was called the Dumont Conservancy, and it's a small, primate conservancy where they have a couple of owl monkey families where they are basically rescuing these monkeys from prior research situations. So these were species of monkeys that were used for biomedical research and things like that. So I did a little bit of volunteer work there originally, and that kind of started my inspiration in realizing how important and necessary it was to try and preserve and protect, not only our wildlife, but, our environment for future generations. And it was just something that I think I became really inspired by. And I actually started out my whole plan was to actually go into the veterinary field, and I wanted to work with conservation biology, and I wanted to basically protect endangered species. And that was kind of what my initial trajectory was. And then throughout my experience in Miami-Dade College, and something that I would like, there's something that I just want to put this in here. There's something that I try to tell young people a lot, and that is, seek mentorship from whoever you can get it from. I'm really big on that. It's important. And also, don't be afraid of sacrificing your time and trying out new things, because that's how you figure out, to do, what you want to do, what you love doing, and things like that. And so I did that. And I took a class in anthropology, and there was an opportunity to volunteer, again, do another volunteer job, and volunteer at an archaeological site. And, so I said, why not try this volunteer opportunity? I can broaden my horizons. And I wanted to just try and get as much, not that I wanted to necessarily do this. I was still planning on pursuing, this other career, where I was getting my degree in biology, but I said, why not just try out new things? So I did that. And I thought it was a great experience. I was working up on this archaeological excavation right in the middle of downtown Miami. And it was crazy because they were basically excavating and salvaging this archaeological site before they were constructing this huge high-rise, condominium structure. Mm-hmm. And so they were just trying to save everything that was going to be destroyed by the construction of that skyscraper. And so, I got to work with these, awesome archaeologists who were very passionate about what they were doing. And I think that anybody can relate to the fact that when you see somebody who's passionate about what they do, that kind of inspires you a little bit, so I got a little bit of that, and I learned a lot about history in that moment. And I learned about the Native Americans who lived in the past there. And I learned about the Seminole War era fort that they had there, and even the Royal Palm Hotel that they had. It was like multiple layers of history in that one spot, which was really cool. So then after that, I kind of went on, I was still studying biology, doing my thing. And, I just said, well, I like this, but I don't know that I'm loving it that much, and I just said, well, what I realized over time was I was really interested in people. And, being Hispanic and Latino, you have so many, diverse backgrounds. And I think that led me to have a, real fond appreciation. And especially growing up in the city, I had, I experienced, interacting with so many people with so many different backgrounds. So I wanted to find, something where I could mix both, where I could, learn about the environment and preserving our past, and then learning about people and preserving cultures. And archaeology was the perfect mix. And so, where I got kind of the best of all that. And so that's kind of what started me down that path. So I got in touch with some of the archaeologists that had helped me out when I was volunteering, and they connected me with the right resources. And, I did a lot of volunteer work, and it was hard, but, that's kind of what led me down that path, at least initially, what developed my, my love and appreciation for that. I was just really kind of inspired by all that.
Got you. And it sounds like you started basically all of that from just wanting to try something new.
Exactly. And I just said, well, there was, I had I think I had, some people that were just telling me, you should just try, volunteer experiences. And I can't remember if it was a professor or whatnot, but, I just said, this was a good opportunity to just, go on a whim. And, if I don't like it, I don't like it, and that was pretty much it. And so I think that, and I carry that experience with me. So whenever I meet, young people, or I speak to a group of high schoolers or something like that, I just tell them, just volunteer your time. Now's the time to do it. You're young, and do that. And that is how I think, and here's another thing I tell young people: if you don't end up liking it, then at least you learned something and you kind of expanded your knowledge. You're like, hey, I did that one time. I know a little bit about, that profession or something like that. Just kind of, widens your perspective and stuff like that, and the different kinds of livelihoods that certain people have, So I think it's kind of a neat thing.
Yeah, that's a really great approach to life. And it really just goes to show how like something so small can really just end up altering like the course of what you wanted to do, and where you go and places you travel and things like that. So that's some really solid advice. And so next I wanted to ask you about your experience working with us at Everglades. What was that like?
Man, in 2 words, life-changing. So definitely life-changing. Yeah, of course. And again, I apologize. The service out here in rural Nevada is challenging. So
Yeah, it's no problem.
but yeah, no, it was definitely life-changing, because I met a lot of people. I learned so much. And yeah, so I guess I can start with how I actually got in contact, how I actually became a part of GYF. I guess I could start with that, because I think it's important too. So, I did things a little bit. I'm very much also of the mindset of doing things the old-fashioned way. So I very much believe in, calling around and just making phone calls, just pick up the phone, call someone, be like, hey, I want to learn more about this. What do you have going on? And so the way it started out was I had a dear friend of mine who's actually, he's a park ranger at Everglades National Park himself right now. And he back then when we first met, he was working for SCA, or I think it's Student Conservation Association. Yeah. And so he was an SCA intern, and I thought it was really cool what he was doing. And, one day, again, on a whim, I just was doing some Googling, and I was just on the MPS website. I was like, what kind of volunteer opportunities are available at my local, and because I knew about Everglades National Park, and I knew about Biscayne. And I said, well, let me do some research and find out, what kind of opportunities there are to volunteer at my own, backyard, so to speak. And so I called this number for a woman in the DC office for a program called the Urban Archaeology Corps. And it was a way to engage the inner city youth into archaeology that was going on in their backyard. And really cool. So she had told me, she's like, well, I don't see that there is a program active at your current national park site where you're living, but you should call the person in charge of cultural resources at that park to see about starting one. So I did that. So I called the chief of cultural resources at Everglades National Park. And I told her, hey, I'm a student at Florida Atlantic University, which is where I transferred after leaving Miami-Dade College. And I told her, hey, I'm a student here, and I'm interested in pursuing this. What do you have? And she said, well, hey, we don't have this opportunity at this park, but we have this other program called the Greening Youth Foundation. And she said, you might be interested in that. She said, we just had somebody, I called her on Monday, and their former intern that I took over his position had just left Friday.
Oh, wow.
So the position had just opened up. It was crazy. And so, some time passed. And next thing you know, I'm on board. And, I never got around to creating that program or doing anything with the Urban Archaeology Corps program, but I did get full-fledged involved into the park. And there was really, I just can't stress enough, like, my experience wasn't just archaeology. I did a lot of things working at Everglades, from working with the public, where I did, public outreach. Mm-hmm. And I even was involved with training some of the seasonal staff, like some of the seasonal rangers that come in, the interp rangers who basically give the guided tours to the public and stuff like that. And I, was part of the seasonal trainings where we, taught them a little bit about, the archaeology at the park and things like that. And even all the way from that to working with some of the biologists in the park, and even getting involved working with the wildland fire management division of the park. So it was really, I got the full breadth of working with the park. And I worked with maintenance too, because working with archaeology, a lot of times maintenance, their projects, maybe it's on a historic building, or maybe there's an archaeological site where they need to dig up a trench for an electrical line. And so, I got to work with them a lot. And that was really awesome, because I think sometimes, depending on where you're working with MPS, you could be in this one job and then never really meet, the other people responsible for, doing all this other work. So it was really a unique experience. I really did get to explore the full scope of, all the different people that work for the park. And I was also very fortunate to have the experience where I got to work with a very diverse set of people from different, backgrounds and ethnicities and things like that. So I was very thankful for that. It taught me a lot. So it was truly a special experience for me.
Yeah, and that sounds really cool. And even just getting to like do all of the different stuff that you did, like
Mm,
going from maintenance, working with people, like actually coming to the park. That's just
mm.
like, I don't know, it's just like the complete NPS experience that you got there.
It
And I did want
was.
to ask you, were you the only intern at that park site?
No. So Everglades has a few Greening Youth Foundation interns. I I was the so I was one of the only interns for cultural resources. I had another girl working with me alongside in cultural resources for a small chunk of time, and then she moved on to work for another museum and not park service. And then after that, I was pretty much the only person in cultural resources. And so there was a few. I know there was a few more GYF interns. We had IT GYF intern. We had a GYF intern working with concessions. So it was and one work, some working with interpretive staff, which is really cool. That all these young people were getting to do all these different things. And occasionally, I had my office mate. He worked with concessions,
Mhm.
and he was GYF as well. And because we were office mates, I I eventually I would sometimes you know actually take him out with me to explore archaeology, because I think sometimes other GYF interns didn't always know. I think that they might have that opportunity to come out with an archaeologist or something like that. So that was kind of a cool thing to do.
Yeah, definitely. I'm sure you enjoyed that.
That's
Hmm.
awesome, man. I love the Everglades. I've been on a few visits down there to visit some of my current interns. Love the culture, the food. It's a massive park. It's beautiful out there. Shout out to the
Hmm.
Everglades, man. They definitely have a great structure set in, for our interns and the internship pathway that we've been looking to create for some time now. And I just wanted to touch on, you stated you've actually, kind of mix and mingle with some of the other interns and different positions out there. What networking tips would you give to the listeners and those that are watching right now that are in their internship at a massive park like the Everglades?
Hmm. So I did. So I just want to start by saying it was somewhat challenging at first, because you don't, if you're not working in the same office as another GYF intern, or you guys aren't sharing a cubicle space, you might not even know, hey, here's this other GYF intern, who's in this position. So sometimes it can be a little bit hard to bump in, and sometimes you could be a little shy, not sure. But I found myself to bump into the other GYF interns really when I was in the break room or something like that, in the lunchroom, and I just we bump into each other, like, oh hey, you're with GYF too, what do you, just literally start the conversation by saying, hey, nice to meet you, like what do you do, what do you do for the park here, and things like that, and just kind of start a dialogue there about your background and things like that. And that was kind of the initial step that I took. And I had a few other GYF interns who kind of bumped into me that same way. So that's kind of what I would advise. And we're always wearing our GYF shirts, so you know, you usually you can, you know, tell us, you know, apart. So, you know, you can always be like, hey, okay, you know, you're with GYF. Okay, cool. So, you know, I haven't seen this guy around or something, you know, let me talk to him for a sec, or, you know, find out where he does, what he does, or where he works or something like that. So that was usually kind of the first, you know, networking step. And that's what I would kind of recommend to people. I know sometimes it can be a little bit, you know, difficult to kind of like break the ice, you know, but just by saying, hey, you're with GYF, I haven't met you before, you know, my name's so and so, you know, that's kind of like my networking tip. I know, like I said, I know it can be a little, you know, tricky, you know, breaking the ice like that, but you know, you already have something in common, you know, so that kind of helps out.
And
Do you
oh,
think? Oh, go ahead, Cameron.
oh, I was just gonna ask you. So along the lines of networking, do you have any advice for some of our interns working now on how to, I guess, maintain and build their relationship with their supervisor?
Yeah. So that's a good question. Um, so my best advice would be to try and be as open and with communication as possible, and you know, and be flexible, because I think one thing that I noticed that may be different from being a GYF intern to being an actual, you know, um, staff member, you know, wearing the green and gray and stuff like that, is that, you know, you have more flexibility to do different things and learn different things. So, you know, try and stay open-minded about, you know, what, you know, your job duty is or something like that. You know, I think that's probably a really important thing. Uh, and so, and like I said, having that open communication. And you know, sometimes I think working in the government, and then I did work a little bit, you know, in the private sector too. So I realized, you know, there is a lot of different, you know, kinds of red tape things, as they call it. And so, you know, sometimes being a little bit patient, you know, with, you know, your supervisors and things like that, you know, is good too. You know, and yeah, I think just trying to maintain kind of an open dialogue and things like that, and trying to have, you know, and I would say, you know, don't be afraid to ask questions. You know, ask questions, like if you find that you want to, like, if you wanted to go on a excursion with the biologist because he's going to go do sea turtle survey, but you work with maintenance, don't be afraid to ask your supervisor, hey, you know, they're going to go do this sea turtle survey, you know, can I go do that? You know, would it be okay for me to do that? You know, to learn, you know, what this particular individual, you know, their function in the park, you know, what they do. uh, don't be afraid to ask. I mean, the worst thing, you know, is get no for an answer, you know. But and I think, you know, but a lot of times you'll get yes for an answer. So, you know, I think that's kind of a good way to start, you know, that kind of just be open and don't be afraid to ask questions is kind of what I think would be my advice, you know, in terms of networking and you know, working with your supervisor and things like that.
Gotcha. Yeah, because even though it is an internship where you're working, you know, it still should be a learning experience. And
Mm-hmm.
so I've had a couple of alumni tell me that the internship that they did wasn't what they wanted to do, but they still knew through the experience that they wanted to be in the field. So yeah, I think
Mm-hmm.
just keeping in mind, and like you said, asking those questions, like if you can go on this excursion or this one, just check out different things while you're there because it's a unique opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And Kennedy, I wanted to circle back to you. What was your question?
Yeah, I was just going to speak up as far as the networking goes. You know, some people nowadays feel as though social media is a good way to connect. And, you know, when you were there as an intern, you know, we're always looking for ways to improve. So asking, you know, former and current interns questions, do you think
Mhm.
having some form of a group on social media or something of that sort would help push the agenda of networking within certain parks? You know, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think that'd be great. I think that would be an awesome resource because I think so after Everglades, I went on to work with the BLM, and they also they had this internship organization called the Rocky Mountain Youth Corps. And then now that I'm here, I was telling Euro and Cameron, now that I'm here out west in Nevada, they have another organization called the Great Basin Institute. And from what I have seen, I can't speak to absolute certainty, but I think after coming into contact with some of those individuals that have worked in those organizations, I think that is something that's probably important, is to have something that a resource where the interns can kind of stick together, because I think it does help. And it's nice to have kind of a common area or space for those individuals. So
And were you able to find someone, I guess, other than your supervisor, who could be like a mentor to you during your own internship?
yeah, um, I did have a few of those, and I mean, maybe they weren't, full-time mentors, but even if it was for even if it was a mentorship, even for that project I was working on, I did I did receive a little bit of that, from working with, one of the biologists, to working with some of the folks over at the museum end of things, they were not my direct supervisors or anything like that, but I definitely got, a little bit of mentorship from them. And I think sometimes, even though someone is not constantly there, 100% of the time, even if for that small period of time where you were working with that person, they were providing you guidance and advice, and they were kind of there for that open communication, to offer that mentorship. I think that even if it's for a small bit of time, I think it really does go a long way.
Got you. Thank you. And I also wanted to ask you, even though you're not still at the Bureau of Land Management, what was that
Mhm.
experience like transitioning from like an internship to actually working in the field full time?
So it was a little nerve-wracking at first, because uh, there was so many layers involved, because it was moving away from home and going to an area where you know you're you're out of your comfort zone, and there wasn't as much diversity.
Mhm.
I was in the office that I was working in. I was also the only Hispanic Latino person in that office, so that was kind of weird, at first. And but then you kind of come together with the other people you're working with, and you know and I think I think for the most part, there are, anywhere you go, you could be facing any kind of adversity or challenges. But for the most part, I have found that, I think at least in the federal workforce, you know, a lot of people, they want to help you out, especially when you're starting out. You know, they want to help you out and they want to see you succeed because, you know, I think, you know, your success is our success collectively. So it was a little tricky because, you know, even though I knew how to do the field work, there was all these other challenges, you know, wrapped up into one package. So it was pretty difficult, but you know, I think eventually you find your rhythm. And you know, when you know, you just, when you're passionate about what you do, you know, you just focus on your work, and that kind of takes you where you need to go, I think, and kind of helps you get through it a little bit. So
Gotcha.
if that answers the question.
Oh yeah, no, it definitely does. Thank you.
Mhm.
And my last question was for you was, even though in your internship you weren't in a small town, we do have some where we send off interns to small town locations like you're in currently.
Mhm.
And then, you know, having to explain to them that you're going to a very small town, maybe like 100 people or so, and there's not a whole lot for like entertainment, or at least like if you were in a city. So what advice or tips do you have in terms of just like making that transition to like a smaller, more confined environment?
Yeah, it's tricky. So my main thing, and this is hard, and it's been hard for me, you know, but you just gotta, you know, break out and say, you're, you know, just go around town, walk around, take a stroll, and you know, I guess, you know, just if you're, even if you're just going to like the little grocery store in town, you know, just talk to people, or you know, talk to the other seasonal workers at the park or something like that, you know, and just try to get involved in the community as much as possible. And I know it's easier said than done. You know, I would say start small, of course, you know, by, like I said, getting in touch with the other seasonal workers in your park, or you know, the office that you're working, whether it's the Forest Service or the Bureau of Land Management. And you know, just kind of like that first break in the ice layer, you know, and just trying to find, you know, some common ground
Mhm.
with some of the other, you know, folks that are working there. If you find, you know, even just a little bit of common ground, that usually helps. And you know, you can, you know, maybe find some sort of activity to get involved in, whether it's going for a hike as a group, you know, getting together, you know, saying, hey, you know, do you know anybody that's interested in going hiking, or you know, what's there to do, you know, around town, you know. And for the most part, I do find that someone, you know, when you kind of open that dialogue up, um, you know, if they don't know personally about something that's going on like that, maybe they get, you know, motivated to do that with you. You know, say, hey, you know, I don't know about anything that's going on, but you know, I'm free to hang out, you know, during this period of time. You know, do you want to get together and do something? You know, go hiking or kayaking, or you know, even if it's taking a long drive to go to the movie theater that may be, you know, 45 minutes away, an hour away, you know, it's something to do. And if, you know, you can find at least one other person to do that with, you know, it helps. It helps, you know, when you're in such a small area with not a lot to do, you know, even the smallest social interaction you have with just one
Mhm.
person, it goes a long way. It does go a long way.
Got you. Thank you for that.
I have a
I
question
think,
myself.
What was that?
When I said I have a question myself, I just wanted to ask if you could specifically talk about connecting more so with history and preserving culture, specifically with what you do through archaeology.
Yeah. So, you know, it's pretty, it has a lot of, you know, it's multifaceted for one way of putting it. And so for historic preservation and trying to educate others about it, it can be challenging at times. And so my biggest resource for doing that is basically any opportunities to ask my supervisor, well, what kind of outreach opportunities can we do? And so whenever that comes up, I kind of just jump at it right away. And so whether it's some sort of event where it's like a community engagement for high schoolers, or whether it's a training for seasonal staff, or something like that, finding a way to relate it to those groups, finding a way to get people to be interested in why the history is important, I think is the key into that engagement with the public. And so kind of the way that I do that is by trying to talk about these cultures and these past peoples, these past cultures, is by trying to talk about them in ways where you and I can relate to them. Because at the end of the day, no matter who we are, we are all people. We're humankind, and at one point or another, even 1,000 years ago, the people that were here before us, they laughed, they smiled, and things like that. And I try to relate that in a way where people can connect to past cultures in that way. And by trying to have them understand that and how it's important for our future, because a lot of things, with history is understanding that our history is kind of what helps guide us go forward. It kind of helps us, understand where we might be going as well as people, and trying to convey that, depending on who I'm speaking to, is really important. So I'm trying to think of one example off the top of my head. When I did a community outreach with some students, they were high schoolers and middle schoolers from the Denver area, and they came out to this area of rural Colorado to learn about the archaeology. And I'm kind of standing there and teaching these kids about these ancient lifeways, and how important it is to preserve these things. And one way I kind of compared it was, even though you may not be partaking of that lifeway yourself right now, it's like saying an endangered species, such as the tiger, although you're not going every day to see a tiger at the zoo, or you're not necessarily directly affected as a human being, we understand the significance of what that that species means. And we understand collectively that being endangered, we must preserve it, we must protect it, and we must conserve it. So in that same way, I try to relate it as these are important lifeways that not only were important back then, but there are still Native Americans who are around to this day who practice some of those lifeways that are really important, you know, as part of their identity as well. And so that's another big thing, is trying to relate that, how those past life ways connect to the identity of the person themselves. So I hope that kind of made a little bit of sense, but yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you. That was huge. I think that was like directly what the conversation needed.
It can be tricky depending on who you're talking to, because, you know, archaeology, some people think, you know, oh, the pyramids, or, you know, the Romans, and they don't realize, you know, the people, they were here before us in you know, before the United States was the United States. You know, who were the people that were living here before, and you know, we're not in touch with that. So it can be challenging at times to try and get those who don't know very much about it. It can be challenging to try and get them to care, you know, because the question is, well, why should I care? Well, I mean, it's the same way, you know, if you ask someone, well, you know, your grandmother or your grandfather, you know, your ancestors, you know, I mean, you would want, you know, them to be revered and respected, you know, in some way, and in the same way we should do that with, you know, all walks of life, no matter, you know, where you come from. It's important to preserve that history for our understanding going forward as a society as a whole. So
Yeah, absolutely, and that's amazing work. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Yero.
You got it, Cameron.
Oh no, I was just saying that's amazing work that you do, because, you know, just keeping in touch with your history can help you learn from it and learn about it, and it's really just a great experience to learn about your own ancestors and what they did to what other people's ancestors were doing. And it's also interesting in a way just to see like how far we've come, but also like how we're kind of still doing some of the same things. So it's always like that interesting part of history to me, to just see like what's different, but what are we still kind of doing, you know?
right, exactly.
Yeah.
And one thing I tried to, there was like one quote that I had for the when I did this particular outreach with the middle schoolers and high schoolers. I told them, you know, this is how I view it as an archaeologist and as an anthropologist. You know, would you rather live in a world, you know, of monochromatic? So that's, you know, just monotone, you know, not a lot of, you know, color, you know, monochromatic, monotony. So a lot of just the same. Would you want to live in a world of polychromatic diversity, where you have all these different colors and all these different, you know, things? I mean, it's just like, you know, one good example I can give you right off the top of my head is like going to the Everglades and seeing all the different wildlife and seeing all the different plants and things like that. And in the same way, that can be represented through people. And, you know, personally, I think it's you know, special to have that, because you know, that diversity is what makes us, you know, human. So
Yeah, absolutely right. And even outside of history, really just like traveling around and seeing different cultures in action, you know, it's just, it completely opens you up to like entirely new life experiences. So I see it's 4:56. So Yero and Kennedy, did y'all have any final questions?
I
No,
did. I wanted to ask Juan, you know, what's your superpower? What do you feel as though your superpower is?
my superpower, that's a good question. I'm not. That's a tough one. I'm not sure if I've found my superpower yet, but maybe if you want to call this a superpower, is that I try to stay positive, regardless of what is facing me. So I try to stay optimistic, and I try to spread that to those around me, because personally I know if I'm having a bad day or something like that, and there's someone around me who has generally a pretty good, atmosphere around them, or they're positive themselves, that's contagious. That's contagious. And if you can carry that with yourself, I think, it makes a difference. So I try to do that. I don't know if that's my superpower, but I try to live my life that way, where, I stay positive and, optimistic about things, and, so yeah.
That's definitely a superpower, man. We appreciate you logging on and taking the time to give your insight to the listeners and the viewers as well, man. We really appreciate you today. And shout out to our outdoor retail partners as well, man. Patagonia, Columbia, Vibram, King, Cool. Man, am I missing anybody? Let's see. The North Face. Oh my God, the North Face. Shout out to all of our OR partners, man. We thank you for the love and support and the gear that you consistently donate for our interns when they're out in the field. Thank you.
Yes.
And thank you again, Juan. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I keep cutting you off.
You're fine, man. Thank you guys for your time. I appreciate you all.
Yeah, this was awesome, Juan.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun. So, I hope to one day be able to go back to Miami and my community and kind of share some of the experiences that I had with, some of the city folk, who don't always get the chance to, the kids in the city who don't always, because I know that when I, growing up in the city, I didn't have, any idea about, the kinds of things that, I know now, so I hope to be able to give back, in the near future. And this is kind of my way of doing it now, talking with you guys. So,
Yeah, that's an awesome goal. And I'm sure it's gonna be really interesting for the city kids who haven't left that environment to like hear what life is like in a small town. Because it's really easy to forget that there are like a lot of these still really small rural areas in the United States with how big it is. And it's like a completely different lifestyle out there. So that should be really exciting.
For sure. Cool.
Well, all righty, folks. I think that will do it for today's Green Speakers podcast. So you can, well, if you're watching this, you probably already know, but this is going to be on YouTube. So thank you again to Juan Carlos Jarquin. Did I say that right?
Yes,
excellent.
Good.
Excellent for being on the call with us today. And yeah, we'll talk to you guys next time.